Welcome to the Brain Scrub. My name's Glenn Sollers. Mary had a little we will. Now, most of you who are my age will be able to fill in those sentences, those gaps. And that's because the power of bias, and that's what today's podcast is about bias and the challenge with bias in life. And especially we're seeing it happen everywhere now, and it's having a tremendous impact on the world we live in. What is bias, do you ask? Well, bias is defined as prejudice in favor or against a person, people, group, thing compared to another. That is what a bias is. I like to think of it as a predetermined way of thinking about something that informs our decisions, our communication, our relationships, our beliefs. These are informed by how we see the world. What is right? What is wrong? And I love being right. And that leads us to confirmation bias, which is essentially finding information that validates our bias so we can feel good about ourselves and we can feel like we're doing the right thing. However, bias is now playing into some of the decisions and challenges we are seeing unfold in the world in front of us. I was recently told and asked to read a book by George Orwell, 1984, and very interesting read because it was written a long time ago, and I see this happening now in terms of what they're describing in the book as how countries and continents operate, all based on bias and bias creation, where governments get involved in manipulating truths, in telling the public what they need to hear and hiding other information, creating artificial wars, if you will, with other nations out there to keep the people in a state of fear. So they make certain decisions or they support the government's actions. They reword documents. They spread fake news. All these things are happening. And one person in particular that I have in mind that complains about fake news constantly is actually delivering a lot of fake news. And this is not my opinion. This is a fact. And this is what's so important in becoming a critical thinker and not going off of biases all the time. We do need bias to make life easier. However, when it comes to things that can dramatically impact others, we need to flick a switch and say, you know what, it's not time for my bias. It is time for some critical thinking skills so I can think beyond what is just being said to me. Biases include things like generalizations, that everybody's doing this, that all immigrants are murderers, criminals, cheats, they're killing your family. That is bias in action and creating bias against certain peoples, which is not the reality. Because in any culture, there are those people. In any country, there are those people that will murder people, that will be involved in crime. But to base it on the color of one's skin or the fact that you immigrated from a certain country makes you this way is deeply disturbing. I live in a country, Canada, which has many, many immigrants. And my family were immigrants as well. I am Caucasian. However, we generally live in a society that supports each other and sees each other as human beings, not as evil individuals that may inflict harm on me. And what I'm seeing happen in different parts of the world is bias is creating a strong divide. And us versus them, the far right to the far left. And I'm seeing it unfold in media. You compare Fox News to CNN. Of course, one is far right, one is far left. One supports Donald Trump, one is against Donald Trump. But the way people speak, like just watch the two different broadcasts, and biases are in action. But what we should be striving for, knowing this is all going on, is not who do I support. Whether you are a Democrat or Republican, or in Canada, whether you're conservative, New Democrat, Bloc Québécois, or liberal, what are the facts of the situation? What is being dealt with at this time? Why are certain decisions being made? Why do we need to make certain decisions? And look at the facts. I heard a broadcast yesterday on Fox News talking about Mark Carney and talking about Canada and talking about how terrible we're doing and providing false information on the economy in Canada, where actually the Canadian economy is growing at not the regular rate, but it's growing at a steady rate. But the facts that this broadcaster provided were nothing. It was just generalized statements that Canada is going through this. They're going through terrible times with nothing to support them. We are dealing with this all the time. And I used to do a lot of bias thinking, and then I started teaching critical thinking skills. And I thought, okay, well, let's think of a systems approach to things. What is the impact of one's actions? And let's look at climate change as an example. I was speaking to a family member the other day, and she mentioned to me that climate change is just cyclical. I can't even say the word that well. And ever since the Industrial Revolution, if one were to look at the facts, okay, we are pumping more and more carbon into the atmosphere. Population levels are skyrocketing. People are flying and driving more. There was just a winter storm in the United States that impacted much of the US. 16,000 flights were canceled. 16,000 in the United States alone. Think about all that carbon in the atmosphere. Carbon is increasing in the atmosphere. Carbon creates global warming. Carbon gets soaked up by our oceans and creates a warming temperature. And then you have people say, well, oh my gosh, there's a winter storm. Obviously, we're not global warming, we're global cooling. No, do your research. 99% of the scientists can't be wrong. And some of us so strongly believe in the fact that climate change does not exist that we're going to deny everything else, even though it is an undeniable fact. I live in British Columbia, Canada, and I've seen it get worse and worse at an accelerated level. In fact, I used to love skiing, and now it's hard to find a day to ski in the mountains because temperatures have changed, which is impacting the environment. So the way of a system thinker is to look for interdependencies, is looking for long-term consequences, is if I make this decision, what's going to happen? And we see this happen in the United States, where tariffs are being put onto products being imported in the United States, viewed as penalizing other countries, where the fact of the matter is Americans are paying more for products because there's a tariff imposed. Canadians, because we get a lot of products from the United States and shipped from Mexico, are also seeing an impact on our food prices. So prices are going up. That is a fact. Beef prices are going up. Mind you, when one thinks about beef prices, you could say, well, it's caused by the tariffs or the government's taking our money. They're charging us more for food. But then if you actually speak to somebody who is in the agricultural industry who has beef cattle, and I saw this on CBC News, which is a Canadian broadcaster, speak to the board of beef producers in Canada. And what's happening, and this is the reason why beef prices are going up, is the climate is changing. There are more droughts. Cattle are constrained. Feed prices are going up. There's so many other things that are impacting the beef prices versus saying, oh yeah, the government's just, it's doing it. No, a system thinker would not say that. A system thinker would say, well, what are the different things informing what's happening right now versus falling into your bias? The other thing with tariffs, and the US is starting to realize this right now, is that it weakens an economy. And what's happening, and maybe this was an unanticipated consequence, or maybe it was what was meant to be because the United States wants to become more of a manufacturing economy and compete against China. I don't know. Who knows the answer? But what's happening now, gold prices are going up. People are putting their money in gold versus the American dollar, which used to be strong, which is going to weaken the American currency, which is going to increase prices for the United States unless it's made in the United States. And a lot of products still are not made in the United States, although they do have a lot of products. But if you think about the farmers in the United States, they're being constrained by water limitations, droughts, forest fires. And now if they are weakening their American dollar, you can be damn sure that your prices are going to go up even further. These are the things that sometimes I see politicians and people not think about. They just think about, I am pro MAGA or I'm anti MAGA. I'm not saying you're right or wrong. I'm just saying, look at the facts, look at the data, not just look at the propaganda and the rhetoric that is being sent out there and the general statements that, you know what, anybody who buys windmills, they're stupid. That person there is stupid. What a disgusting word that's being used. And when a leader can stand in front of the world and start calling other countries stupid for buying a wind turbine as an example, is not only insulting, you are eroding the relationships of people that have partnered with your organization, your country, for years. And now it's being destroyed because that individual is able to get a collective movement and get people to believe their fake news that they're spreading. Folks, look at the facts of the information. Think about what the consequences are. Think about who is leading us. What are they saying? Is it actually true what they're saying? And there's things that the Republicans have said that are completely true. But there's a lot going on there when you look at the media where there's a bunch of untruths there. Try to find people out there that know what they're talking about. Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, love him or hate him. You know what? I look at him as somebody who does focus in on the facts, but even he's using language that is so destructive about other people, like our former prime minister. Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of our former prime minister either. However, I don't want to start insulting people because people are doing the best they can, I believe. But what happens is when there's a bias out there or a movement like the MAGA movement and everybody buys in, what you're also creating is a state of fear. And nobody will stick up or stand up for what's happening. And then what happened the other day, were 2 shootings in Minneapolis. And the videos clearly show that the individuals who were killed presented no threat to the ICE agents. That is video evidence. Anybody watching that would see that. However, what's happening is biases are getting in the way. So one broadcaster on TV was trying to show his viewers that you can make your cell phone look like a gun. Well, if you are an agent who is there to protect the public and do your job, and you mistake cell phones for guns as an example, then you got some work to do. Because we all have cell phones, and therefore we're all carrying weapons. But then it just goes on and on and on. It is insane because the Americans have this bias that a lot of Americans, well, I'm talking more about Republicans, and this is just my perception, that we need to focus on the United States. And every other country out there is killing other people. But look at your own country. How many people are being shot by guns every single day? Yet there is this Second Amendment that we have a right to carry arms. But a system thinker would look at, okay, you have a right to carry arms, but what's the consequence of that? What's happening? Is it that the rest of the world is destructive, or are you destroying yourselves because you have handguns? Ways of a system thinker. Now, we are having the same sort of problem in Canada. It's happening everywhere. Here in Canada, we have a province that may want to separate. We have another one that is thinking about separating. But then one needs to look at the data. One needs to think about the consequences of this. If we separate, what could happen? Well, let's say an oil-producing province like Alberta decides to separate because they feel that they're funding the rest of Canada. In my point of view, you know what? We're all Canadian. You move to that province, you got a job, you're being paid, and yes, you have a lot of reserves, but that reserve is not necessarily the province's. It's in your territory. However, it belongs to Canada. We're part of a nation. We all benefit from it. Then, if the prices drop, you may be struggling as a province. Who's going to help you then? And then if you want to join the United States, consider their values. How is that going to impact you? How is that going to impact the borders of Alberta? How is that going to impact your healthcare system? All these different things versus, you know what, I'm going to vote against Canada because, you know what, we're giving them too much money. Well, this happens a lot with families as well, where we have biases. We think that they're against us and they're the problem. But you know what? This is where dialogue needs to happen more. How do people, how do countries, how do continents, how do we all work together and come to an agreement that these are the problems that we need to resolve and here's the data that supports it? How do we not view others as enemies and make them partners in creating a better world? How do we seek to understand others? How do we drop our own bias and have some compassion for others and consider what they're going through or why do they want it? We're all people. We're all human beings. But the next time you watch the news, consider how are your biases playing out? What information are you choosing to listen to? What information are you choosing to deny because you want to be right about the way you think? Thanks for listening.